Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast. I'm Irene Gallia, a reporter with the Globe and Mail, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Globe and Mail headquarters is located on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis Nation, and the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. The impact of workplace experiences on the choices of young women in the early stages of their careers cannot be underestimated. These experiences heavily influence their decisions to either remain with their current organizations or seek opportunities elsewhere. Talent retention is increasingly competitive in today's market, making it crucial to assess what strategies are effective and ineffective in fostering career progression for women. Today, I'll be speaking with emerging leaders and advocates for talent development. They will be sharing what they value from their employers, how businesses can better position themselves to retain young women in the early stages of their careers. Now, we aren't anticipating any technical issues, but we appreciate your patience should any arise. And if you need any technical help, please click on the help desk icon at the bottom of your screen. During the last 5 minutes of the panel, we'll be answering audience questions. So if you have any for our panelists, please type them into the Q&A box. And today's webcast is part of the Globe and Mail's Women's Collective, an initiative dedicated to sharing the perspectives of women in workplaces across Canada. The Globe's Women's Collective is supported by Novo Nordisk, Desjardins Insurance, Omers, Bombardier, and Grant Thornton. Thank you. So let's get started. I am so excited to introduce our panelists for today. And joining me today, we have Carleen Horsfield, geotechnical engineer and team coordinator at WSP Canada. Jenna Camisoli, director and global head of campus recruitment and talent development at Scotiabank. And Rachel Wong, co-founder of Monday Girl. Thank you all for joining me. So why don't we get started by having each one of you tell us a bit about yourselves and what you do. So Rachel, why don't we start with you?
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me. So as mentioned, my name is Rachel. I'm the co-founder of Monday Girl. It's Canada's leading networking platform and weekly newsletter for professional women. So Monday Girl members get unlimited access to resources, a vibrant community, and mentorship from leading women at top companies, including Google, Microsoft, Deloitte, just to name a few. For my background, I spent the majority of my career in high growth startups, and I actually joined Uber in its early days to launch Uber Eats in Canada.
Great. Okay, Carleen.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Carleen, and I work as a geotechnical engineer and team coordinator at WSP Canada here in Toronto. I've been here for 5 years, and before that, I studied at Queen's University, where I did a dual degree in Bachelor of Arts in Global Development and a Bachelor of Engineering in Geological Engineering. So apart from work and school, I love to run and I love to craft. I have a little side business called the Crafty Cabin where I make and sell scrunchies and baby clothes and things like that. And yeah, so I'm really excited to be here. Last Friday was actually International Women in Engineering Day, so it's very, very timely as well.
Great. And Jenna?
Thank you, Irene. Thanks so much for having me here today. Hello, my name is Jenna Camisoli, Director of Global Head, Campus Recruitment and Talent Development. So just a really long and fancy way of saying that I have the privilege of leading what I believe is the best team at Scotiabank. Half the team is focused on that attraction side of early talent, and the other half on the development and retention through student and new graduate programs. I've been with the bank for 12 years now. I've kind of bounced around across different areas across the organization, started in operations, touched in risk management, and then landed in HR about 7 years ago. On my downtime, I like to say I'm not very good at too many things. I can barely throw a ball. Hobbies are not my thing. I love to pamper myself. So getting facials, massages, my nails done, it's always been a passion of mine. And I do have a toddler at home. So when I'm not, doing that self-care stuff for myself, I'm chasing after him 24/7. So thanks so much for having me here today.
Well, I am so excited that you're all here because issues relating to young women in the workplace is something we can all relate to and we all have feelings about. So let's just get right in. We're talking about young women as they start their careers. So what, in your view, are some of the issues that are specific to young women as they start in jobs? Why don't we start with Carleen?
Yeah, so, a challenge that I've grappled a lot with throughout my career, and I know a lot of young people, perhaps especially women, can relate to, is imposter syndrome. One study that I came across on LinkedIn claims that men will apply to jobs where they only suit 60% of their requirements, whereas women will apply only when they have 100% of their requirements. So I think that does speak to, imposter syndrome possibly being more prevalent in women than men. And I think that applies to all industries. But if I think about, my own industry of engineering consulting, within Canada, only 14% of registered engineers are women. So there's certainly a lack of representation, which I think can make imposter syndrome even more prevalent for women in these male-dominated industries.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see, are there strategies that companies can use to help young employees understand these feelings? I mean, how can we deal with that? How can we help young women and young employees through that?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things we can do. There's the importance of having women leaders for young women to look up to and having that representation at higher levels. Fostering allyship within the company. So, and you don't need to be a woman to be an ally to women. I think about a small example that comes to mind. As being in a meeting with all men, which is not uncommon. And one of the attendees, referred to the group as gentlemen. And I think more often than not, when people say exclusionary things, it's just force of habit and not intentional at all. But, another man on the call spoke up and corrected him. And it just felt good because, it's uncomfortable to stand up for yourself sometimes, especially in scenarios that might be intimidating to begin with. So, yeah, it makes a difference if there are people that recognize these things and show up as allies. There's lots of other things like mentorship programs, which I'm sure we'll talk about, and sponsoring women to attend industry events and conferences, just chipping away at that imposter syndrome. So,
and your manager actually, we talked about most of your team and your management is female as well, right? So,
yeah.
Has that made a difference for you and your career?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. I've actually only had women as my managers in all the 5 years that I've been with WSP, which is quite incredible, especially being in such a male-dominated industry. And I do think this has made an impact in growing my confidence, seeing women being represented in those senior engineering roles, hosting meetings, talking technically, leading the team towards success in general. I think it all paves the way to show that it's possible for me too, and for other young women colleagues that are also grappling with that imposter syndrome.
And having women in those leadership positions, I'm sure, helps get around those using gentlemen and it enforces the the presence of women in those spaces. Jenna, why don't we go to you? So what to you are some of the unique challenges that young women face when they start their careers?
Yeah, it's a great question. And Carleen did such a great job bringing up imposter syndrome. I think that's definitely a really big one. I think representation is a big one that's kind of linked to it as well. Sometimes you feel like you can't see yourself grow or have that really ambitious trajectory if you don't see necessarily folks that look like you, that have the same personality as you maybe, or the same ambitions as you, or whatever it may be in those positions as well. So I love to see and hear, from Carleen's perspective, that she does have that support from a management perspective and has those female leaders to kind of aspire to be more like and to work towards those types of positions herself, and to see that I do have a potential place in this company long term. I think another big piece around how to combat that and how to organizations can work towards that is creating that culture of inclusion. So making sure everyone feels like their voice is heard. Everyone has that place at the table, understanding that, there are going to be some individuals that are more vocal maybe in the moment and some that like to take in information, digest it, and then maybe come back with thoughts later on. There's no right or wrong way of doing things or thinking or processing information. So creating that culture and making sure that everyone around the table, male, female, whatever the case may be, feels like they are a part of the greater team.
And how do you make sure that happens? I mean, is it manager training? Is it meetings with the whole company? How do you practically ensure that managers are respecting different sorts of learning styles and communication styles then?
Yeah, I think a big piece of it is rooted in education, information, right? Like there's a lot of training that goes into something like that. Empathy is a big one, being able to pick things out, understanding how people may be feeling, being able to have foresight into situations is a big one as well. But a lot of it is deep rooted in education information. Like there's I don't believe anybody goes into situations as a manager, as an employee, and wants to hurt people's feelings or wants to exclude individuals. A lot of times it is done unintentionally. So just bringing awareness to it is really important, and having individuals understand that that may be the case for some individuals. So being very proactive and saying, okay, I'm going to stop for a second. Have I heard from everyone around the table? If not, even message them separately on the side, maybe not calling them out in a meeting, but, message them on the side and being like, you're being quiet. Like, do you have a thought, or are you just processing? Like just doing a little bit of a check-in. Like I find that's a really nice approach.
Yeah.
I almost want to add to that, Irene and Jenna. There's a psychological phenomenon called anchoring bias, which is kind of what Jenna was mentioning there. And it's the word to describe people's tendency to agree with the first piece of information that they learn about something, which can be threatening to women, because if it is men that generally have more confidence in meetings and are getting their words in first, then maybe women's ideas are less likely to be heard. It's just these human behaviors that we need to be aware of and make sure that we're hearing what women have to say in the room.
Why don't we bring in Rachel? So Rachel, in your view, what are some of the main issues that women face uniquely when they start their jobs?
Yes, this is something that we talk about all the time with Monday Girl. Again, we actually started Monday Girl because of our personal journeys. My co-founder and I, when we first graduated, we were being constantly told that your network was your net worth. I'm sure a lot of people probably have heard that. We even joke, we're like, it's such a dad thing to say. And we were trying to go to networking events. We were trying to learn more about different industries, get our foot in the door, maybe even find a mentor. And that didn't really happen in the traditional networking systems that we saw. So what we decided to do was take things into our own hands, create our own version of it, where women could feel safe to ask the questions that they want to ask, to see mentors that actually look like themselves, which is why I love that Jenna and Carleen mentioned representation. That was something that was really important to me. I started my career in tech, and I did get really amazing advice from well-intentioned senior managers, but they didn't look like me. They had different lived experiences, so it really wasn't that applicable. So I do think there's so much merit in, just making sure that we have systems and mentorship programs outside of organizations to really make sure that women feel heard and supported.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that has to do with maybe the way that women think about relationships. I mean, when I think of some of the typical networking environments, like, for instance, the stereotypical golf. I know golf is not just, many people play golf, but there's still that association that it's somewhere where men can talk about work relationships. And maybe as a woman, we feel a little uncomfortable thinking of a relationship as being to progress our own careers. Is that a phenomenon that you experienced?
Oh, 100%. I love that you mentioned the golf analogy, and we've seen this anecdotally, and this comes from actually us talking about Monday Girl in different groups, different organizations. if we were to discuss the idea of networking with a group of men, the reaction that we get from them is like, oh, that's awesome. I love to golf with my boss, grab drinks with the guys, for sure. Love to network. It gets me ahead. Versus if you were to mention the idea of networking to the group of women that we typically see going through Monday Girl, they get nervous about it. They think it might be icky, transactional. And again, it's the connotation that it holds that's so different towards different groups of women versus men. We actually did notice that in a study. This is actually conducted by the Kellogg School of Management. Apparently, women who try to network like men to get ahead actually do the worst. A lot of it really comes from the missing component of a close inner circle of women. And the study actually revealed that there's a need for that tight-knit group of women because it does provide critical information and job opportunities and challenges that they won't get from networking like men.
Mm-hmm. So do you think, a question for all of you, how can companies make sure that women have those sponsors? I mean, is it through formal mentorship programs? And if it is, I mean, is there a risk of siloing women if we deliberately put them with female leaders as mentors, or is that ideal? Where do you stand on that?
I'll kind of start with that. I mean, I think there's multiple different ways to tackle it. I think formal programs are awesome. I do love the pairing of women with women. I feel like there's certain conversations and learnings that can come from that relationship that sometimes can only come from that type of relationship. I think also when it comes to mentorship, though, you might have mentors or even coaches for different particular reasons. So just because you have that one relationship, maybe from more of that female perspective, it's not to say that you might not have other mentors or coaches to kind of help you in other ways. So I do love that aspect. I love the programs. I love the formality of that, the structure. Sometimes people also just need that guidance, that governance around what that could look like, right? It's not a very natural thing that a lot of people can just jump right into and know what to do. But I do think the other side of it is there is some ownership and accountability on a management side of things. Like I will, take it upon myself to see, is there somebody on my team, someone I work with, someone that I interact with that maybe I want to seek out, right? Tap them on the shoulders, check in with them, be a little bit proactive on my side, because it may not be something that they necessarily seek out for themselves yet, but making myself available, or even seeing like I see some really great potential. Can I help you with something? So I feel like that's another thing, and that might happen a little bit more organically or through certain interactions. That's not like a formal type of program, but I have done things like that as well for certain individuals that I feel do need a little bit extra support, or someone maybe I feel like I see myself in a little bit, from way back when. So I think there's different ways you could tackle it.
Sure. And Rachel, have any insight into that? How we can foster that kind of mentorship and support in the workplace? Oh, of course, through Monday Girl.
Absolutely. And I think, even beyond organizations or support groups like Monday Girl, in the workplace, I so agree with the idea of there's a lot of, responsibility that comes with management to make sure that you do foster that top-down sort of environment where, people can feel supported. They do feel safe to be able to ask those questions and relate to you regardless of your gender. But I will say that there's so many different ways that companies can tap into it. I think the first and foremost thing is tapping into an employee resource group. Lots of companies have them. If not, definitely could be worth exploring. So the example is having, say, like a woman group, and making sure that besides just making sure that someone volunteers to do this, takes this on, is actually making sure that there's the right amount of funding and support from it from, an executive perspective. So that's the one thing I really want to call out when it comes to ERGs.
Yeah. And so Carlene, you're in a field that STEM has traditionally been male dominated, even though we're seeing more and more women coming through post-secondary. How are you seeing your company? Are there any specific ways that you're specifically attracting young female employees, and it's been successful?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add to what Rachel and Jenna said on that as well, which I think also feeds into your next question there. But employee resource groups, I think, is a huge thing. You know, at WSP, like you mentioned, Rachel, we have Women of WSP, and we also have the Developing Professionals Network. And through both of those clubs, you know, there's events and different webinars and, you know, book clubs and things like this. And it's just a really nice platforms for people to create those communities for themselves with those, you know, under those commonalities. And then the other thing is sponsoring women to attend industry events and conferences. You know, I've done this a lot, and I think it's a great way to learn and network within your own industry. You know, even tonight I'll be going to a geotechnical society event, and before it starts, there's a 1-hour networking session just for women. So it's really nice, you know, that you feel like your employer supports that and encourages that. I think it goes a really long way.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you've asked to do, or that has come from the top?
So I think it goes both ways sometimes, but for this specific one, I received an email from a colleague who's helping organize it. He's like part of the Geotech Society, who's is in a leadership role. So for that one, you know, I did hear about and kind of got permission ahead of time. But oftentimes, if I come across something that I'm interested in, I just ask, and usually it's supported. So, yeah.
Okay. So studies have shown that women, when they come in at entry level, are pretty much 50-50 with their male colleagues. And then as they go through their careers, they're less represented at managerial and executive and C-suite levels. And although that's increasing, it's not increasing very fast. So how do you think we can speed that process up? How do we get women into more senior roles, and how do we start doing that from when they're just junior in their companies?
Yeah, I'll kind of start with that one. I mean, I think it's 100% true. I believe there's a research that came out last year. It was released by McKinsey, and basically it was around saying for every approximate 100 males that were promoted into management roles, only 85 women were promoted into management roles. And Carlene mentioned imposter syndrome. Like, there's a lot of things that are wrapped up in confidence. Women in general need to feel like they can 100% do the job before they put their name in the hat, versus, you know, a male sometimes thinks, oh, I could do 50%, and they'll just be like, oh, why not? I'll just throw my name in the hat and see what happens. We see a lot of that confidence, that ambition come out. It's a tough one, and this is where I say, you know, on the management side, being able to see when those moments are happening, and providing some extra support and wrapping your arms around those individuals that do have potential but maybe are hesitant. I think there's a lot of things when it comes to breaking those narratives or those cycles. I mean, that culture of inclusion is going to be really important, like I mentioned earlier as well. Recognizing employee accomplishments, right? Not necessarily individuals' intelligence or their traits or personality, but saying, you know, this is something someone has done that's made progress, or has advanced the function or advanced the organization, or made an impact for customer, shareholders, whatever it may be. Recognizing those successes can really help build that confidence, and hopefully instill that desire, that momentum to keep pushing forward. But I do think that there's a lot on the management side to kind of help push that along, because it's not something that a lot of individuals come in day one at an entry level position and are kind of pushing themselves forward with, you know, just without that support.
Mm-hmm.
I can jump in right after that because I can relate to that point. I was very fortunate early in my career to be handed a management position very early on, and probably too early. And that kind of made me realize by learning on the job, learning on the fly, making mistakes, learning from them, that, sometimes you do have to promote people before they truly are ready, especially if they are expressing that sort of competency and also that sort of interest. I have seen for myself and also for others in the organization, like how that uplifts everyone and creates that really positive sort of environment for everyone to see themselves in different trajectories.
Carlene, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything Rachel and Jenna said, and I had a bit of a similar experience there, which I think came down to good sponsorship and mentorship. But I think to speak to like the young women employers that are out there listening, I think no matter what your position is, you can find those small opportunities to demonstrate leadership and ownership in the role you're assigned, and kind of get noticed by those leaders, and then in turn, I think you'll see success come from that. Like in my case, in geotech engineering, when you first start out, you're fully in the field, like you're out there collecting the data. And I made it my objective to slowly take things off my PM's plate where I could, like, maybe printing the documentation that I need on site, or just being proactive in little ways, and just to show that I was eager and capable. And slowly, time went on, and I was slowly given pieces that I can manage and slowly get included in more of the project management side of things. So it definitely doesn't happen overnight, but just leveraging those opportunities where you can, and making sure your boss knows that that management is your goal, so that they can help facilitate getting you to where you want to go, right? Just that open communication.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So women are not equally represented in leadership roles, but we also know that there are specific reasons why they leave the workforce. I'm curious to know if you've had any experience, if there are any specific reasons that you frequently hear about why women are either leaving, or why they're taking a less of a intentional route, trying to move up their career. Are there any specific reasons that you frequently hear about that take women away?
I can take this just because we see a lot in our community, again, because it is such a safe space for women to share their reasons. And we'll have to call it the obvious, right? Like having a kid and that penalty, and how it is one on pay, future career trajectory for women versus men. And there's studies around there's so many studies around this. And one actually for Canadian women, it shows in 2019 that women aged 25 to 38, they saw their earnings drop by 4% in the 5 years after having a child compared to those with no children. But it was even worse for younger women. So those aged 25 to 29, they lost an additional 14% in earnings over this period. Mm-hmm. In comparison, men didn't see any penalty. In fact, some of them actually saw an increase in the earnings after they became fathers. So we do talk a lot about the idea of, it seems like there is this ticking clock. It seems like there is this sort of rush to get to your highest earning potential before you want to have a kid. And we do see that impact how people think about the trajectories, how they think about what their next career path is. So I wanted to call it the obvious fact there.
Yeah. So yeah, let's get into that. I mean, why are there, what's happening? What's happening after a woman has a kid that would make their salaries decrease, or if they wouldn't grow at the same rate as men?
Yeah, there's a lot of I guess speculation out there, right? There could be the idea that employers see fathers as like harder working, or they're more committed than non-fathers. That's up for debate. But I think the main fact that we hear and see a lot of is the career costs of parenthood are largely placed on women, with the tasks they take on. And again, it really does shift the conversation and narrative we're seeing a lot of questions being asked about egg freezing, different options for parenthood. So we do see those conversations really emerging in our groups. And I think it really does shift how we think about our careers and planning ahead.
Jenna or Carleen, do either of you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I can add to that a little bit just on, the bias that does exist on mat leave. I think that just makes it all the more important that we have senior leaders that are women who understand that it's possible for a great, to be a great mother and a great leader. You don't have to choose just one, and that they use this power to sponsor promising young women, and I think that's a huge thing to helping eliminate this bias.
Yeah. And Jenna, when we were preparing for this event, you shared that you returned from mat leave earlier this year. I'm wondering if you can describe to us what it was like returning, and what was it like for you, and what did your company do to help you integrate back into the workforce?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks, Irene, for that. I definitely am very lucky. I work with really phenomenal individuals at a really awesome organization. And I was welcomed so warmly. Like I knew I was going to get a warm welcome. Again, I work with the best people possible, but a lot of parents, a lot of moms, new parents, really wrap their arms around me. We're just constantly checking in, seeing how I'm doing. It's a tough transition, especially if it's your first child, which is the case for me, like just discovering, what parenthood looks like and having to go through daycare for the first time and all those wonderful milestones that you see with babies and toddlers. And then coming back to work and integrating and acclimatizing into an organization that maybe you've been at for a really long time, but a year sometimes feels like 5, right? At the pace that things move and the projects and progress that's made. So coming back was really tough, but I felt very, very supported. Like I mentioned, I had past managers, leaders, current ones, teammates, peers reaching out to me, offering support. And it wasn't even just for that first little bit. Like I actually found it really sunk in after about a month. Like I think the struggle mostly was in that first 3 months. The first couple of weeks, it just feels like a whirlwind. But once you kind of settle into the new norm of a routine, it really just starts to sink in. So it was definitely very, very tough. Thankfully, I have a phenomenal husband that is able to do a lot of the default parent activities during the week, like the daycare drop-offs and pickups and breakfast times and all that kind of stuff. So I was able to focus a little extra on work as I was also trying to adjust, but also see where I wanted to take the function further and what my goals were going to be for the year. But yeah, it is really tough. Like you really do need that support system. Without it, like I could really see how it can crumble fast for some folks.
Yeah, I mean, are there specific things that a company can do, like integrating that person? Should we be thinking about bringing them into meetings before, starting them off earlier? I mean, or should we be completely respecting their time away, maybe leaving it up to the employee? And any specific ways and tools that we have to make that transition easier?
Yeah, I think it's the last suggestion is the right move. I think giving the individual on leave the choice, do you want to pop into meetings? What do you want that communication to look like while you're off? I had that kind of exit conversation with my manager as I was about to take off. So I appreciated the, every month or two kind of a check-in, tell me what's going on, give me the download. And then kind of leading up to, I was starting to slowly have conversations with individuals on my team and then, kind of ease my way. And everyone is going to have a different comfort level. Some people, when they're on leave, they want to be and need to be fully on leave. So obviously respect that. But I do think you want to kind of leave it to that individual and cater to their needs, because even child to child, right? They could have multiple children. It could look and feel different each time. And then I think when it comes to integrating them back in, I think coming from a real big place of understanding that, they now have two full-time jobs, the one that they're getting paid for, and then the one that they go home to afterwards and have to maintain the house and the kids and the laundry and the cleaning and all that kind of stuff. But I think coming from a place of understanding and empathy and checking in and making sure that open communication is there and felt. So if it is feeling overwhelming, that the person can kind of say, hey, I'm kind of feeling this, maybe I need to take 5 minutes to kind of just do a mental recharge.
Yeah, for sure. And Rachel, you talked about egg freezing. What are you hearing from your members at Monday Girl? How is that playing a role in their careers, and what sort of supports are they getting from their companies to do that?
Absolutely. There's a lot of conversation about it, and there's a lot of great questions being asked. And I think the main thing here is that you can see it as, and the way that a lot of these members are framing it as is like another option for them to think about their careers, another way for them to restructure and reframe how they think about going about their careers. So it's been really interesting seeing these conversations, seeing the support. A lot of women are actually getting together to attend different seminars about this. But it's been so fascinating to see how tied this is in our conversations about early to mid careers for young professional women.
Mm-hmm. Is this something that, how prevalent are these conversations? Are like, what sorts of things are your members wondering? What are their questions about this?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, how much does it cost? Will my company pay for it? And we're, very glad to hear that a lot of companies are providing different, coverage around this. So that's been really interesting to hear. And again, it's that knowledge sharing. Mm-hmm. It's the knowledge sharing of saying like, look, I looked into this. My company provides it. Does yours? Look into it. And some people even would say, I didn't know that was an option. And the other thing to think about as well is, okay, these are the payment plans I have. Can you afford this? At what point in time can you afford this? So it's really started this very open, very safe and supportive sort of conversation about something that is very intimate and wasn't necessarily considered a key tenet of someone's career or professional development, but now it has become so. And I think that's something that's really fascinating when it comes to exploring the conversations being had with our Monday Girl Slack community.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see how companies continue to support that, and hopefully funding goes up for women to do that. I know right now there's not always money for employees to do that. And if there is, it's limited to one round, for instance, which isn't always successful. So another elephant in the room is the pandemic. And we know in some ways this has been great for young employees and women in general, but on the other hand, it's had its disadvantages. So how have you seen the pandemic affect how women are succeeding? And maybe Kayleen, if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think about the pandemic, kind of the first thing that I think about that's changed a lot, of course, is flexibility within the workplace. And as that relates to women, in a lot of cases, it's true that women are the primary caregivers within their family. And in these cases, more flexible policies might attract women disproportionately to men. So, some examples within my workplace are flexible working hours. So you need to be online from this time to this time, available for your teammates to get a hold of you. And then outside that, you can figure out what hours work best for you. Then there's, flexible working locations. So you have to be in office on your working day, on your anchor days. They're collaborating with your team. And then apart from that, maybe you can work remotely or work from an office that cuts commute time for you. And the final thing I'll say on flexibility, it might seem like a small thing, but just the change in language from sick days into wellness days just allows for more flexible use of those days. Maybe you need a mental health day, or you want to go on a field trip with your kid, things that come up that aren't strictly you in bed with the flu. So yeah, I think flexible policies is a big one.
Jenna, do you have anything to add on that?
I think she hit the nail on the head on that one, honestly. I think, and this maybe isn't just necessarily for women. I feel like with the working from home, the pandemic, it's affected a lot of individuals when it comes to relationship building. Like there is an element that is taken away by everyone working remote so frequently and not having that time in person to connect, bond, collaborate, learn spontaneously, organically, just by overhearing conversations, bumping into individuals in the office. So I do think that there is a disadvantage in that way, and it's across the board, especially for more junior folks or individuals who are new to the workplace. They are losing that element of learning and development by just being around other individuals, being in person with their managers. So there's pros and cons to it, but I do feel like a little piece of that has been lost. So I do appreciate those moments to come in person and see my team, because I even have so many moments where I learn from them just by accident, just by sheer luck.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To pivot a little bit, so Jenna, you lead campus recruitment, and I'm sure companies on this call might be wondering how they can reach female students, female applicants, especially in fields like STEM. Do you have any tips on how companies can do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. It has to be very deliberate and purposeful. Like there needs to be specific thought. You can't necessarily just go out to the masses and cross your fingers and toes and hopefully everyone will just come to your doorstep. So for my team, and we do this across the globe, we'll be very thoughtful in terms of our outreach. So partnering with Monday Girl and other really, really awesome organizations is definitely one lever we'll pull. But partnering with on-campus women-led clubs. I know Carlene was part of a women in engineering type of club at her campus. So tapping into those individuals, those women that are really passionate about development, growth, networking, meeting individuals in the industry. There's also really great case competitions and hackathons that we'll participate in that are women-led for women. So those are really awesome ones to sponsor and to participate and support with, even if it is just supplying some mentors or some individuals to judge the competitions. So there's different ways to go about it, but it has to be very purposeful and very strategic and thoughtful. It's not going to be a mass kind of strategy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then for all of you, when managers are thinking about how to hire or how to promote, of course, we take into account the work of that individual, but we also have to think about soft skills. And I think one of you mentioned it might be a stereotype, but I think we've all seen anecdotally as well. Sometimes women don't speak out as much as at meetings, or are more nervous about giving a contrary view. But there are soft skills that give them advantages. So what soft skills would you say managers should be considering when helping to develop young employees and thinking about when they're promoting or hiring?
I can start with that. I think the big one that I am hearing from a lot of leaders across the organization, it's something that I definitely look for in my own team, is creativity. Now, there's soft and hard skills associated with the word creativity, but it's really looking at discovering new ways to do tasks, refine processes, identifying new avenues of business, of finding ways to add value to the organization for shareholders and customers. So some of the pieces with that is like risk taking, so individuals who are feeling comfortable and confident enough to kind of say, I'm going to try this out, and if I fail, I'm going to fail fast and recover faster. There's pieces around understanding context, asking questions, understanding history, thinking through what is it that we need to do now to get us to where we need to be a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that really future focused thinking, and thinking about what's going to differentiate us as well. So I would say creativity is like a big bundle, and there's so many different pieces in there.
Yeah. Rachel, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say this is a little bit of a pivot from the, are there specific soft skills? But one thing to really think about when hiring and when evaluating young talent is that idea of imposter syndrome that, again, is so much more explicit with young women than it is with men. And I think we did talk about this, right? Like a lot of women won't apply for the same sort of jobs despite meeting 70% of qualifications than their male peers. However, the thing to really think about is how do they really try to go about it? It's very hard to quantify, but when we think about that go-getter, ambitious mentality, have they tried to reach out to you via LinkedIn? Have they done their research about something? And these are things that we really try to coach. These are things that will also come with time and more experience and feedback. But being able to take that chance on somebody, despite not having, all of the confidence or all the qualifications, that can go a long way, because with time, we have seen that, female professionals do need a little bit more of that support and advocacy to get to the next step.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if that also relates to how they talk about their own success and write their resumes, and if employers can use that lens when reviewing.
Yes.
How they should be thinking about success.
Yeah, this is the last stat I'm going to throw out there, but it's really fascinating. There is a study on the idea of female professionals being perceived as more lucky than their male peers. And the research also found that when men make mistakes at work, it's because they're unlucky. But when a woman makes a mistake, it's all more likely to be seen through the lens of their ability. And this is from the London School of Economics pretty recently, but that idea of luck, right? And again, like there is so much that we can do in the workplace and from a hiring recruiting perspective to really think through that.
Mm-hmm. Kayleen, do you have thoughts, soft skills that hiring managers, people promoting can think about when considering who to?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, the first thing that came to mind was allyship, which I already touched on. But another thing is having those mentorship programs. Just that support is, I think, huge in well, first of all, attaining, but then retaining young women. If I think about my own career, I've been fortunate enough to have two incredible mentors, Scott Peaker and Lisa Coyne, and definitely a lot of my success and growth is thanks to them. Just increasing that confidence in the workplace and having those people that you feel like you can go to get all your silly questions out of the way. That's kind of apart from, the technical hard skills. It's just people that you can go to and you can get support from. So.
And encouragement and
yes.
ideas about growing your career, understanding the possibilities. And it makes me wonder how soon employers should be seeking out female talent for leadership roles, and whether, what should we be doing this before women even get into the workplace in university, in high school? How can we get women to think about like really, really taking those leadership positions? What do you think?
So thinking about that, I guess maybe I'm speaking more to the parents and teachers on the line with this, but inspiring leadership from young ages, and maybe getting your young girls, female doctors or female dentists, just so when they're young, they see those women being represented in roles that are historically, or traditionally roles of men. Yeah, and then, I think Jenna touched on science camps or yeah, things where they just see kind of women taking leads to inspire themselves. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rachel, Jenna, how soon should we be getting women to think about that, and how do we do it?
Yeah, so I think I agree with everything Carly mentioned. I think the only thing that I would say to it, we drive this home pretty hard in our development programs, our campus programs at the student level and at the new grad level. It's not necessarily everyone's path to go into a management position, right? And you can be a leader without being in a management position. So it's just about developing those competencies and those skills that are really important to that organization in terms of being a leader or a CEO of your position and developing what those look like. So that can start literally day one, day after graduation, day one, first day on the job. It can really start there. But I think as the individual goes through their own experience, their own learning journey, they'll start piecing together what makes the most sense for them. What do they want from a lifestyle perspective as well? And that'll also dictate what their path and what their place is going to look like down the road.
Mm-hmm. And that could be communicating, tapping young women on the shoulder for opportunities, right? To fill in for someone on when they're taking time off, right? Or giving them a challenging project that might be a bit above what they're used to doing, matching them up with more senior employees, right? To do projects like that. Rachel, do you have ideas how we can foster an interest in leadership, encourage leadership? How soon should that start?
I love all the perspectives that Jenna and Carleen shared, and I so agree. There's so many different ways someone could become a leader. So I think that's super important, and you don't really get that without a diverse range of perspective. And that's something that we're really keen on and developing with our Monday Girl members. They get access to a full roster of over 100 mentors. We refresh them every single quarter to make sure there's different backgrounds, both from like a diversity perspective, but also from an industry perspective. And we've noticed that some members who are more junior in their careers, they're more hesitant to book time with different people outside of the specific industry or even the specific title or company that they want to work for. But we really try to reiterate it's so important to get access to that because it's so important to broaden your perspective on what else is out there. And we've seen so much good come out of that in connecting with someone from, the same title at a different industry, a different vertical. We've seen those connections really play out and become actually much more fruitful than the one if you're just trying to talk to someone that you really want to be in 1 year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're getting near the end of our call today. Audience members, I'd encourage you to put a question in the box right at the bottom of your screen. And I'll start with our first audience question. Is there anything that a manager has done for you in your career that has helped you along the way?
Yeah, there's been quite a few, and some of them, some of those moments can sometimes hurt your feelings, but it's honestly for the best. Like I've had some really push me to try to be part of certain projects or take on certain roles that feel super scary. But looking back, they were absolutely the best opportunities for me and the most the most growth, the most tactical learnings I've ever had. There's been some cases where I've had coaches or mentors of mine literally sit me down and say, Jenna, get out of your head. Like, I'm gonna have a really unpleasant conversation with you right now because you are totally your own worst enemy in this situation. Like, let's talk through these intrusive thoughts you're having. So a couple of those moments really hit home and they've stuck with me. Another big one was I had an individual who is still a big coach in my life. He said to me, and it stuck with me for years, around so what? So kind of really thinking really critically about what you're doing. What's the driving force behind this? Is this important? Like, so what? What does any of this matter? So I constantly keep that in the back of my head.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Rachel, Kayleen, any specific things that a manager has done that really helped you?
This might sound a bit out there, but I think the best thing, one of my managers, I've been very fortunate to have many in my career that have had very different strengths and ways of developing me. But the best thing that one of my managers did was let me fail.
Mm-hmm.
I think and being a manager now, I know how that feels. You feel so empathetic. You really want to be there to just like rescue them and save them from the mistake. But there is so much learning and development that comes from making mistakes. Of course, they're not super critical, but like little ones where you can actually coach them through it, let them take that first stab, and then work with them on that. And I think I was very fortunate to have had managers let me fail because they trusted me and they worked with me on it.
Mm-hmm. Kayleen, anything?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So mine's a bit different that comes to mind, but I think for me, getting my managers to just remind me and the employees of the meaning of our job. Like if for in geotech, I'm looking at soil and rock all day, zoomed all in on that. It might not seem very exciting or meaningful at first, but really all work is meaningful at the end of the day. Big picture, reframing the mindset, we're classifying the ground so that the designers and contractors can build this new subway system and therefore, increase accessibility to the city, decrease overall carbon emissions. Just reminding your employees of the overall greater mission of your day-to-day job. And that can go a long way, I think, for exciting and motivating all of your employees and maybe those menial seeming tasks in the moment. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think we have time for one more question. So from one of our audience members, how do you find sponsors that will bring you up and not just offer encouragement? Bring you up, that means help you with your work and talk on your behalf. So how do you find those people?
I'm super passionate about differentiating between sponsors and mentors, and the different roles that they can play in your career. And just to like redefine sponsor versus mentor. Sponsor is someone that will be in the room that you're not in and say your name and put you forward. But I think a big misconception people have is that the same sponsors will be also the mentors in your life that will teach you and guide you. There could be a total difference. There could be sponsors that won't be your mentors, vice versa. And I think the sponsors are the ones typically that actually have much more power, influence in the workplace. And those are, relationships that should be fostered top down. Those are the responsibility of your workplace and your manager to make sure that those things are happening. And if not, making sure there's an environment where you feel safe enough to call that out if it's not happening.
And if you're a young woman, a young employee, and you feel like that's not happening, that you don't have someone who will, what do you do about that?
This is very tough. I can speak from my own experience, but having those hard conversations, learning that from an earlier age, doing it, that's helped me so much in my career. And I think you need a community. You need other people, whether that's your peers, someone that you feel safe to talk to. Maybe it's another manager, to be able to help you navigate that in the most professional, but empathetic way possible. Because again, I think the theme was sometimes people don't realize that it's not happening. So again, like taking the best intent possible.
Okay, that is all that we have time for. I want to thank all of you on behalf of the Globe, Carleen, Jenna, and Rachel for being with us today. And I would also like to thank all of the audience members for joining us today and asking questions. We will be sending out a recording of this event soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day.